The Galactic Confederation had been running smoothly for approximately 3,000 standard cycles, which was impressive considering it consisted of 47 different species who could barely agree on what constituted appropriate elevator music. They had mastered faster-than-light travel, quantum computing, and the art of writing regulations so complex that even the regulations needed their own regulations. What they had not mastered, apparently, was humility. Humans had joined this cosmic country club exactly 8 cycles ago, and the general consensus among the established members was that Earth's representatives were adorable, in the same way a child playing with blocks is adorable. Sure, they could stack things and make loud noises, but nobody was trusting them with the really important toys just yet. Station Catharis 9 orbited a purple gas giant in the Tertian sector, and it served as one of the Confederation's premier training facilities. This was where security personnel from across known space came to prove they could handle themselves in situations ranging from diplomatic protection to full-scale combat scenarios. The station boasted technology that could simulate everything from zero-gravity knife fights to navigating a hostage situation during a solar flare. It was, by all accounts, the finest military training installation in the galaxy, which made it the perfect place for certain individuals to prove a point about human inadequacy. Commander Vrex of the Kaltorian Empire stood in the observation deck, his 4 arms crossed in what his species considered a posture of dignified contemplation, but what mostly looked like he was hugging himself. Kaltorians were tall, crystalline beings who communicated partially through light refraction, which meant they literally sparkled when they talked. It was both majestic and deeply annoying during staff meetings. Next to him stood Dr. Cressis, a voidborn who resembled what would happen if someone gave an octopus a doctorate and a superiority complex. Her species had evolved in the cold darkness between stars, and they never let anyone forget it. Voidborn considered themselves the intellectuals of the Confederation, which was their polite way of saying everyone else was breathing oxygen when they should be thinking. The third member of their little conspiracy was Lieutenant Boron, a Threxian whose species had evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world. Threxians were built like muscular bears who had decided to stand upright and develop a complex military hierarchy. They respected strength, discipline, and the chain of command, in that order. What they did not respect was the newest member of the station's security detail, the human. She had arrived 6 weeks ago, transferred from some backwater Earth defensive installation with a service record that was impressive by human standards, which was to say it was adequate by galactic ones. Her name was Mackenzie Cross, though if taken to calling her the Terran in tones usually reserved for discussing minor bureaucratic inconveniences. Cross was, by human standards, physically fit and mentally sharp. By galactic standards, she was a soft, gravity-dependent biped who required an embarrassing amount of oxygen to function and whose species had only figured out antimatter containment 3 cycles ago. The fact that she had qualified for off-world security duty was seen as either a testament to human determination or evidence that Earth standards were dangerously low. The betting pools favored the latter. Cross was currently in the station's gym, visible on the observation deck's monitors, running through what humans called calisthenics. To the assembled aliens, it looked like she was trying to fight gravity and losing. Vrex's light patterns flickered with amusement. "We could end this charade," he transmitted through his crystalline structure, his words appearing as holographic subtitles for the non-Kaltorians. She is clearly out of her depth here. Why the Council approved her posting remains a mystery. "Because the Council is playing politics," Caressis replied, her translation device rendering her chromatophore patterns into standard speech. Earth contributes resources and wants representation. We must appear inclusive. But there is no regulation stating she must succeed. Boren growled, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. My people have a saying. The pack is only as strong as its weakest member. She weakens this station's credibility. If she cannot handle proper training, she should return to her dirt ball and guard moisture farms or whatever primitives do. This was not entirely fair. Earth had several thriving cities and had contributed meaningful advances in what the Confederation dismissively called brute force engineering. Humans had a talent for making things work through sheer stubbornness when elegant solutions failed. But fairness was not the point of this conversation. The point was proving that humans did not belong. The training room protocols are comprehensive, Vrex mused, his lights shifting to a calculating amber. And accidents, while rare, do happen, particularly when systems are pushed beyond normal parameters. Cressis's tentacles rippled with interest. The combat certification is scheduled for her tomorrow. Standard procedure. The room would adapt to her physiological limitations, of course. Unless, Boren said slowly, those adaptations were to malfunction. Slightly. Not enough to kill her, obviously. We are not savages, but enough to prove she cannot handle genuine galactic standard threats. There was a pause as the three of them considered this. What they were suggesting violated approximately 17 different regulations, numerous ethical guidelines, and at least 3 interspecies treaties. On the other hand, those rules had been written by committee, and nothing written by committee had ever stopped anyone determined enough, the cameras. Experience glitches occasionally, Caresses observed, particularly in high-energy training scenarios. Equipment stress, electromagnetic interference, all very technical, all very explainable. Vrex's light pattern cycled through several colors before settling on determined blue. Tomorrow, then, we give her a proper Confederation-level scenario. No human-appropriate modifications. Let her prove she belongs here, or let her fail and return home where she can be safe. They told themselves this was about standards, about maintaining the integrity of the Confederation security forces, about ensuring that only the best protected the citizens of 47 worlds. They were lying to themselves, of course, but people tend to do that when the truth makes them look petty. The next morning arrived with the artificial punctuality of a space station, where day and night were bureaucratic suggestions rather than astronomical facts. Cross reported to Training Room 7 at 0800 station time, her kit properly secured and her expression set in what humans called game face. The training room was a massive spherical chamber, 60 meters in diameter, its walls lined with holographic projectors and gravitational manipulators that could simulate virtually any environment. The floor could become quicksand, lava, or ice with equal ease. The walls could sprout obstacles, enemies, or cover as needed. It was essentially a very expensive and potentially lethal playground. Cross stood in the center, checking her equipment harness. The room would provide simulated weapons and threats, but her harness contained real medical sensors and emergency beacons. Standard safety protocol. The sensors would monitor her vitals and shut down the scenario if she approached dangerous thresholds. At least, they would if someone had not quietly adjusted those thresholds to levels that would make a Threxian warrior sweat. In the observation room, Vrex, Cressis, and Boren watched through the one-way viewing panel. Around them, other personnel went about their duties, unaware of the sabotage about to unfold. The 3 conspirators had been careful. The modifications to the training program were buried in subroutines. The camera glitches were timed to activate once the scenario began. Everything looked routine. Beginning combat certification for Security Specialist Cross, the automated system announced. Scenario: urban pacification, hostile engagement, mixed environmental hazards. Difficulty, standard. Except the difficulty was not standard. It was approximately 4 levels higher than standard. Standard would have given her human speed opponents with human-level tactics in Earth-normal conditions. What she was about to face was designed for Threxian shock troops. The room flickered and transformed. The smooth walls became a ruined cityscape, all broken concrete and twisted metal. The lighting dimmed to simulate urban warfare conditions, with fires flickering in the distance, providing inconsistent illumination. The temperature spiked upward, mimicking a burning city in summer heat. Cross immediately dropped into a defensive stance, eyes scanning for threats. Good instincts, at least. Then the first wave hit. The simulated enemies materialized from cover, moving with the speed and coordination of veteran soldiers. Hard light constructs, solid enough to register hits, but not solid enough to actually kill, though they could certainly hurt. They came from 3 directions at once, a standard suppression tactic. Cross moved. She did not move like someone panicking. She moved like someone who had done this before, albeit never at this intensity. She grabbed what the room had designated as a barrier, using it for cover while her hands found the simulated rifle that had appeared in her equipment harness. In the observation room, Boren grunted approval despite himself. At least she knows not to stand in the open like prey. The human fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 of the simulated enemies. Her accuracy was decent. Not exceptional, but decent. The kind of shooting you got from someone who spent time at the range but had not been in actual combat often enough to develop the muscle memory that transcended thought. The remaining enemies advanced using proper tactical spacing. Cross fell back to secondary cover, still firing. She was breathing hard now. The temperature in the room was 43 degrees Celsius, roughly 20 degrees higher than comfortable for humans. She is adapting, Cressus observed, a hint of surprise in her chromatophore display. I expected more panic. Give it time, Vrex replied. This is only Wave 1. Wave 2 began with an explosion. Not a fatal one, but enough to throw Cross off her feet and make her ears ring. Simulated, but the concussive force was very real. The room's gravitational systems could replicate the physics of explosions quite accurately. Cross rolled with the impact, came up with her rifle ready, and immediately had to dodge as the ceiling began collapsing. Simulated debris, but solid enough to cause concussions. She scrambled backward, nearly twisted her ankle on rubble, and found herself in a narrow corridor with hostiles approaching from both ends. Classic killbox scenario. This is excessive, one of the other personnel in the observation room commented, a young Kaltorian technician who had wandered over to watch. That scenario is rated for Tier 3 operatives. Training malfunction, Vrex said smoothly, his lights displaying concerned yellow while his internal thoughts were considerably less worried. The system occasionally pulls wrong difficulty files. We are monitoring. She can call emergency stop if needed. Which was technically true. There was a panic button. What Vrex did not mention was that the panic button's response time had been delayed by approximately 45 seconds. Long enough for things to get very interesting. Cross did not hit the panic button. Instead, she did, something the observers were not expecting. She analyzed her situation for approximately 3 seconds, then ran directly at the group of hostiles approaching from her left. Not away from danger. Toward it. What is she doing? Boren muttered. Being human, apparently. Cross hit the first simulated enemy with her shoulder, using momentum and the element of surprise to bowl it over. These were hard light constructs, programmed to fight like soldiers. not expecting a target to charge them in a narrow space where their numbers meant nothing. She grabbed the fallen construct's weapon, a simulated plasma rifle, and used it as a club to smash the next closest enemy. It was brutal. It was inelegant. It was extremely effective. She cleared the first group through sheer aggressive audacity, then kept running. The corridor opened into a larger space, giving her room to maneuver. The remaining hostiles from the second direction were still trying to reposition when she found elevated cover and started picking them off. Her breathing was labored now. The heat was getting to her. Humans were not designed for this. Their cooling systems required sweat evaporation, which worked poorly in high humidity. The room's environmental controls had added humidity specifically to hamper this. Cross's face was red. Her movements were slower. She was clearly struggling. She was also still standing. Wave 3 initiated. This time it was a vehicle. A simulated armored transport rolled into the space, its weapons tracking toward Cross's position. This was a scenario designed to teach personnel how to handle mechanized threats. The proper response was to use anti-vehicle ordnance from the equipment cache that should have spawned nearby. The equipment cache had not spawned, a small oversight in the modified program. Cross looked at the approaching vehicle, looked at her inadequate weapons, and made a decision that made perfect sense to a human and absolutely no sense to anyone else. She ran at it. "She is insane," Cressus stated flatly. Cross sprinted toward the vehicle, which was designed to be slow and heavily armored. As it turned to track her, she jumped. Not onto it, that would have been stupid even by human standards. She jumped to a piece of elevated rubble, then to a broken wall section, then onto a beam that was approximately level with the vehicle's top access hatch. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest. But they had evolved as persistence hunters on a high-gravity world, and that gave them something other species often overlooked. They were very, very good at moving in 3 dimensions when motivated. Cross landed on top of the vehicle with all the grace of a dropped brick, but enough accuracy to grab the access hatch. The vehicle's defensive systems were designed to target threats at ground level, not immediately above. She wrenched the hatch open, dropped a simulated grenade inside, and jumped clear before the whole thing went up in a satisfying explosion of hard light particles. In the observation room, there was silence. That was not standard tactics, Boran finally said. No, Vrex agreed. No, it was not. The scenario should have ended there. That was the designed completion point. 3 waves, increasing difficulty, final mechanized threat. Pass or fail. The system would render judgment and shut down. The system did not shut down, because Vrex, in his careful planning, had disabled the automatic completion protocols. He wanted to see her fail. He wanted to see her hit that panic button. He wanted proof that humans could not handle what the rest of the galaxy considered routine. So the room kept going. Wave 4 spawned, then Wave 5. The environmental hazards increased. The temperature climbed to 50 degrees Celsius. The oxygen percentage dropped slightly. The lighting became more inconsistent. This was beyond training now. This was approaching actual combat conditions. And Cross, exhausted and confused about why the scenario was not ending, kept fighting. She was slowing down. Her movements were less precise. She took hits that would have been bruises on her bruises. Her water supply was exhausted. She was running on fumes and stubbornness. In the observation room, the young Kaltorian technician was looking alarmed. This has gone on too long. Her vitals are approaching dangerous levels. The scenario is almost complete, Vrex said, though he was beginning to feel the first hints of concern. His plan had been to push her hard enough to quit, not hard enough to actually injure her. This is within acceptable parameters. It was not within acceptable parameters. The technician knew it. Vrex knew it. But pride and panic were wrestling in Vrex's crystalline structure, and pride was winning. Then something changed in the training room. Cross stopped running. She stopped trying to fight efficiently. She stood in the center of the ruined cityscape, surrounded by incoming hostiles, and her expression shifted from exhaustion to something considerably more dangerous. She looked angry. Not frustrated angry, not scared angry. The kind of angry that came from someone who had just realized they were being deliberately screwed with and had decided to return the favor with interest. Cross looked directly at where she knew the observation window was located, even though it was one way and hidden. She looked directly at it and smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then she stopped playing by the room's rules. The training room systems were sophisticated, but they followed logic trees. Enemy spawns appeared from designated entry points. Environmental hazards triggered based on position and timing. The room's AI was smart, but it thought like a program. Cross started thinking like a human, which was to say, she started thinking like someone whose species had survived by being unreasonably creative problem solvers. She stopped fighting enemies and started fighting the room itself. When the next wave spawned, she did not engage them. She ran to the nearest wall and started hitting it, not random hitting. Targeted strikes at points where she could see the holographic projector's telltale shimmer. The room's walls were armored, but the projectors were designed to be modular for maintenance. They were not designed to be punched repeatedly by an angry human with reinforced gloves. The first projector sparked and died. A section of the simulated cityscape flickered and vanished, revealing the smooth metallic wall beneath. The simulated enemies in that zone glitched, their hard light forms stuttering. "What is she doing?" Boran demanded. "Breaking my very expensive training room?" Vrex said, his lights flashing alarmed red. Cross moved to the next projector, and the next. She was not trying to win the scenario anymore. She was trying to end it by destroying its ability to function. Every projector she killed reduced the room's ability to generate threats. The enemies began flickering in and out of existence. The environmental effects became spotty. "Stop her," Cressy said urgently. "Shut down the scenario." Vrex tried. He sent the shutdown command. The system did not respond. In his cleverness, he had modified too many protocols. The room's safety systems were confused. Half of them thought the scenario was still running normally. The other half thought there was a critical malfunction and had locked everything down to preserve data for investigation. The room had effectively trapped itself in a logic loop. And Cross was inside taking her frustration out on every piece of equipment she could reach. She found the gravitational manipulators next. Those were harder to damage, but humans had a saying about sufficiently advanced technology being indistinguishable from magic, right up until you hit it with a rock. Cross hit the gravity emitters with several large pieces of simulated rubble. The room's gravitational field began fluctuating wildly. Debris started floating. The remaining hard light constructs lost cohesion as their projection matrices destabilized. Cross herself stumbled as local gravity dropped to roughly Mars normal, but she adapted quickly. Humans were good at adapting. The cameras, which had been conveniently glitching on Vrex's command, chose this moment to actually malfunction due to the gravitational chaos. The observation room's displays went dark. "Get emergency response down there," the Kaltorian technician shouted, no longer caring about protocol. "If the gravity fails completely, she will be slammed into the walls." Several things happened very quickly. The training room's emergency systems, which had been trying to sort out what was happening, finally gave up on logic and activated the hard shutdown. Every system died simultaneously. Gravity, lights, projectors, everything. The room went completely dark and completely silent. The observation room erupted in chaos. Personnel were shouting, alarms were blaring, emergency response teams were mobilizing. Vrex, Caressis, and Boron were very carefully trying to blend into the background while simultaneously panicking about what they had done. The training room's door, which had been locked during scenarios, unsealed with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Medical teams rushed in with lights and scanners. They found Cross sitting in the center of the dark room, surrounded by broken projectors and sparking equipment, her back against a piece of rubble, breathing hard but conscious. She looked up at the medics with that same not nice smile. "The cameras glitched," she said. "Funny thing about that, they glitched right after someone adjusted my difficulty settings and disabled the completion protocols. Really funny coincidence." The chief medical officer, a void-born named Thesic, who had no involvement in the conspiracy, scanned Cross with professional efficiency. Severe dehydration, heat exhaustion, multiple contusions, and what I suspect is barely contained homicidal ideation. Get her to medical. As they helped Cross to her feet, she looked back at the destroyed training room. "Sorry about the equipment. It was trying to kill me. I took it personally. The investigation took 3 days. Station security reviewed logs. They pulled backup data. They interviewed personnel. The conspiracy unraveled with the speed and grace of a house of cards in a hurricane. Vrex, Cressis, and Boren were identified within hours. The modified protocols had their digital fingerprints all over them. Their access logs placed them at terminals at exactly the wrong times. The young Kaltorian technician, whose conscience had kicked in, provided testimony. The 3 conspirators tried to argue they had been attempting to properly challenge Cross, that they were maintaining standards, that it was merely aggressive training. The review board was not impressed. Commander Vrex was demoted and transferred to a logistics position counting supplies on a mining station. Dr. Cressis lost her research position and was reassigned to teaching basic astrophysics to first-year students. Lieutenant Boren was dishonorably discharged from Confederation service entirely, a black mark that would follow him across all 47 member worlds. The Confederation took training accidents seriously. They took deliberate sabotage even more seriously. They took actions that made the Confederation look bad to its newest members, with the fury of bureaucrats whose paperwork had been complicated. Cross spent 2 days in medical, rehydrating and recovering. On the 3rd day, she was cleared for duty and summoned to the station commander's office. Station Commander Yalix was a Varendian, a species that resembled 4-meter-tall mantises with a philosophical bent. They were known for being fair, thoughtful, and absolutely terrifying when angry. "Specialist Cross," Yalix said through their translator, their mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "You destroyed Training Room 7. "Yes, sir," Cross replied. "It was trying to kill me." "Indeed. The repair costs will be significant." "I can pay installments," Cross offered. Yalix made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "That will not be necessary. The individuals responsible for the sabotage will be covering costs as part of their punishment. I called you here to discuss your status." Cross stiffened slightly, preparing for termination. "Your combat certification," Yalix continued, "is approved. Unorthodox methods aside, you survived a scenario rated 4 tiers above your grade level. While I cannot officially encourage destroying training facilities, I can acknowledge effective problem-solving under pressure." There was a pause. "Furthermore," Alex said, "the Confederation Security Council has taken interest in your case. They are impressed by what they are calling human adaptive combat doctrine. You are being offered a position as a training consultant. Specifically, you would help develop scenarios that test creative thinking rather than purely conventional tactics." Cross blinked. "I am not being fired. You are being promoted. Humans, it seems, have a particular talent for what we politely term asymmetric problem solving. The Council believes this perspective would improve our training programs." "Asymmetric problem solving," Cross repeated. "You mean cheating." "I mean winning," Alex corrected. "Survival is not bound by rules of fair play. You demonstrated this quite effectively. Now we would like you to teach others to think similarly." Cross considered this. "Do I still have to do the combat certifications? You just completed yours in spectacular fashion." The recording, once the cameras were restored, has become quite popular among security personnel. I believe the current view count is approaching several million. "Wonderful," Cross muttered. "I am a viral video." "You are alive," Alex said simply. "In our profession, that is the only metric that truly matters." Cross was dismissed and returned to her quarters. She expected anger. She expected resentment. She expected the other station personnel to view her as a troublemaker. What she got was considerably different. The Threxian security team, who had previously ignored her, nodded respectfully when she passed. A group of Kaltorian technicians buying her drinks in the station lounge. Her training schedule suddenly included requests from senior personnel asking for her input on scenario design. Apparently, breaking a training room through sheer spite had earned her more respect than any proper certification could have. The station's unofficial social hub was a bar called the Gravity Well, where off-duty personnel gathered to complain about regulations and tell lies about their combat experiences. Cross found herself there a week after the incident, nursing something that was technically alcohol but tasted like antiseptic. A void-born engineer approached her table. Not Cressis, who was currently teaching remedial physics to unenthusiastic teenagers, but a younger one named Velik. "Specialist Cross," Velik said politely. "May I join you?" "Free station," Cross replied. Velik settled into a seat designed for tentacled beings. "I wish to apologize on behalf of my species. Dr. Cressis's actions were unacceptable. We do not condone such behavior." "Appreciated," Cross said, not holding it against all Voidborn, just the one who tried to cook me. Velik's chromatophores rippled with what might have been amusement. "There is a question many of us have been debating. When did you realize the scenario was sabotaged?" Cross took a sip of her terrible drink. "About 30 seconds in. The difficulty scaling was wrong. Enemies were too coordinated. Environmental hazards were too extreme. Either the system had a catastrophic malfunction or someone was messing with me. And you continued anyway." Cross smiled slightly. "I wanted to see how far they would push it. Plus, I was angry. Angry me makes poor decisions, like fighting a training room." "Destroying a training room," Velik corrected. "There is a difference." "Fair point." More personnel had gathered, listening to the conversation. A Threxian lieutenant named Corvus spoke up. "The part where you charged the armored vehicle. That was insane." "That was calculated insanity," Cross corrected. "The vehicle's weapons had tracking delays. Its armor was strongest on front and sides. Top access was a weak point. Basic tactical analysis. While sprinting and jumping through an active combat zone," Corvus pointed out. "I work better under pressure." This got a round of laughter from the assembled personnel. Cross was discovering that nearly dying in spectacular fashion was apparently a bonding experience. Over the following weeks, Cross settled into her new role. She consulted on training scenarios, pointing out where conventional thinking left exploitable gaps. She ran workshops on human combat philosophy, which mostly consisted of explaining that humans would absolutely use whatever was available, conventional or not, to survive. The training programs began changing. Scenarios became less predictable. More emphasis was placed on adaptation and creative problem-solving. Personnel who had previously cruised through certifications on pure physical capability found themselves struggling against challenges that required actual thought. The failure rate increased. So did the survival rate of personnel who saw real combat. Commander Yalix, reviewing the quarterly reports, made a note that hiring the human had been controversial but effective. Sometimes the best solutions came from unexpected sources. 3 months after the incident, Cross was running a training scenario for a mixed group of Confederation personnel. She stood in the observation room, watching them struggle through an urban combat situation she had designed. "They are doing poorly," noted her assistant, a young Kaltorian named Prex, who had specifically requested to work with her. "They are thinking conventionally," Cross replied. "Watch. The team leader is about to make a critical mistake." On the screens, the team leader ordered his squad to hold a defensive position in a building, textbook tactics for their situation. The building promptly exploded, simulated, but the message was clear. "You made the building explosive," Prex observed. "I made everything potentially dangerous," Cross said. "They need to stop trusting their environment. Real combat does not follow training manual rules. This is cruel. This is educational. They just learned not to assume anything is safe. That lesson might save their lives someday." Prex's light patterns cycled thoughtfully. "You are a very different kind of instructor than the Confederation is accustomed to." "Good," Cross said. "Your previous instructors taught you how to win by the rules. I am teaching you how to survive when there are no rules." The scenario continued. The team, rattled by the exploding building, began approaching situations more cautiously. They checked corners differently. They questioned their environment. They adapted. They passed the scenario. Afterward, during the debrief, one of the trainees, a Threxian, asked the question that Cross had been waiting for. "Instructor Cross, why do humans fight like that? Why not follow established tactical doctrine?" Cross considered her answer carefully. "Because humans evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us. We had predators bigger and stronger than us. We had weather that could freeze or cook us. We had diseases and parasites, and 100 other things that wanted us dead. We survived by being stubborn, creative, and willing to try anything that might work. Following the rules meant following patterns. Patterns meant predictability. Predictability meant death. So we learned to break patterns." She gestured at the training room. "Every species in the Confederation evolved differently. You all have advantages we lack. You are stronger, faster, tougher, smarter in specific ways. But humans, we are generalists who specialize in survival. We adapt. That is our evolutionary advantage. We are not the best at anything specific, but we are good enough at everything that matters." The trainees absorbed this. Cross continued. "When those 3 conspirators trapped me in that training room, they thought they were proving human weakness. What they actually proved is that humans do not quit. We get angry, we get creative, and we survive out of spite, if nothing else. That is what I am teaching you. Not human tactics specifically, but human mindset. How to survive when everything goes wrong and all the plans fail." Another trainee, a void-born, raised a tentacle. "Is that why you destroyed the training room instead of surrendering?" "Partially," Cross admitted. "Also because I wanted them to know I was not someone they could dismiss." Respect is earned. Sometimes it is earned through proper channels. Sometimes you earn it by breaking expensive equipment and making a point. This was not exactly official Confederation doctrine, but it was honest. As months passed, Cross's reputation spread beyond Station Catharis 9. Other facilities requested her consultation. Her training methods, initially controversial, began showing results. Personnel trained under her direction had better survival rates. They adapted faster to unexpected situations. They stopped assuming their technological advantages meant automatic victory. The Confederation, slowly, began to recognize that humans brought something valuable beyond resources and political presence. They brought a perspective forged by being relatively weak on a relatively dangerous world, which meant they had gotten very good at surviving through cleverness rather than raw capability. Commander Vrex, working his logistics position on that mining station, occasionally saw reports about Cross's growing influence. He had time to reflect on his mistakes while counting supply crates. The irony was not lost on him that his attempt to prove human inadequacy had instead proven the exact opposite. Dr. Cressis, teaching basic astrophysics to students who did not want to be there, similarly had time for reflection. She had spent her career believing intelligence meant following proper research protocols and established methodologies. She had never considered that intelligence might also mean knowing when to break things. Lieutenant Boran, dishonorably discharged and struggling to find work, had perhaps the clearest view of all. He had respected strength and discipline. He had not respected the human because she seemed weak by his standards. He had learned, expensively, that strength came in many forms, and underestimating someone because they were different was a failure of imagination more than a failure of their capability. Back on Station Catharis 9, Cross completed another training session and returned to her quarters. Her small space was decorated with a mix of Earth memorabilia and gifts from grateful trainees. A Threxian battle standard, a Kaltorian light sculpture, a void-born mathematical proof that was apparently quite beautiful if you understood abstract algebra. She sat down and began writing her report for the week. Training was progressing. Personnel were improving. The Confederation was learning. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Cross smiled at the memory of those 3 conspirators who had tried to prove she did not belong. They had trapped her in a training room and watched the cameras go blind. They had thought this would reveal human weakness. Instead, it had revealed something the Confederation desperately needed to learn. Humans did not give up. They did not surrender. They got angry. They got creative. And they found ways to win that nobody expected. It was not always elegant. It was not always by the book. But it was effective. And in a galaxy full of rules and regulations and proper procedures, sometimes what you needed was someone willing to break the expensive equipment and make a point. The Galactic Confederation had been running smoothly for 3,000 cycles. It would continue running for many more. But it would run a little differently now, with a little more flexibility, a little more creative thinking, and a lot more respect for the small, soft, gravity-dependent bipeds from Earth. Because as it turned out, humans belonged after all. They just belonged on their own terms.